Yo, I'm Toycat, and today we're going to be taking a break from the very serious geopolitical issues we usually cover on the channel to instead talk about tipping in the UK, because as of a couple of days ago, this has actually changed. A new law took effect as of the 29th of July, and this affects how the service charge works when you pay it in a UK restaurant. For those unfamiliar, when you get the bill at most restaurants, especially in London, you're going to have a 10 to 15% of the cost of the bill added as a service charge. It's discretionary, so you can remove it, but it's effectively a built-in tip which the restaurant is suggesting you pay, and it's one which is very controversial with a lot of people, and one which is interesting because it can roll into the hundreds or thousands of pounds in this case. But I actually had a friend visiting me from America yesterday, and he asked, when I mentioned to him, like, oh yeah, the law's changing, that has to go to employees now, he asked, where did that go before? Fun fact, it didn't need to go to the employees, but also fun fact, why exactly would restaurants decide to add it this way, rather than just deciding to raise their prices? It's more than you might expect. It's not just about menu discretion. There is a weird tax treatment for service charge, and I want to dive into that a little bit today. But first things first, what actually happens when you tip? Well, as of around 2019, tips have to go to employees. Before that, there was no legal obligation, but now it actually has to. Tips go to the employees that you tip. It is crazy that that is ever not true, and I think there are lots of places around the world, especially in tip cultures, pointing at one tip culture in particular, where, yeah, employers are just allowed to say, we'll keep some of those tips to pay other employees. In my opinion, that is insane. That is not what a tip is, but the service charge is even crazier because for most people, this is just a kind of mandatory-ish tip. They're saving you the hassle, allowing you to tip indirectly. However, this 10 to 15% added onto your bill is entirely optional, and so it's treated differently for fun tax reasons, but there is no guarantee that your waiter will see a penny off the service charge, with some restaurants saying it's used to cover things like breakages and people doing a runner. When you pay a service charge, it's not necessarily, and likely in lots of places, not going to the employee that serves you, but instead is going to cover breakages. That's not how service works. That's literally misleading, but it has been widespread and accepted until yesterday, where things have changed. So the Employment Allocation of Tips Act forced employers to allocate any service charges that were going to employees, that were meant to be going to employees, to actually give it to them. When you take a service charge, it now has to go to employees, and this can't, obviously, they have to be earning minimum wage below this, so it can't be like, we spend our money on them. That's the argument that service charges always used to be like, well, we do have, say, £10,000 a month in employee bills, and so if we get £10,000 a month in service charge, that pays for the employees in a way that, you know, like, it's not like they would be paid nothing without a service charge, right? And so they're removing that flimsy justification, and the reaction from restaurants has been gold, in my opinion, because this shows you just how ridiculous their previous system was. So now that your tips have to go to the people you're tipping, lots of restaurants are deciding things like, service charge has to go to the people giving you service. Lots of places are trying to work out loopholes, with Ping Pong Dim Sum trialing a brand charge instead of a service charge. This was the most ridiculous thing that is, I think, that this website right here is just reporting, like, oh, they're using it to fund wage rises for their restaurant teams. Oh, as soon as this law was announced, and as soon as it was coming to effect, they changed their service charge into a brand charge, and that brand charge obviously is exempt from a service charge law, and they say they're doing this thing, which isn't a service charge, to help out employees. Oh, it's interesting. There's a law where you have to give that money to employees, and they made a new term where they wouldn't legally have to give the money to employees, with their plan being that they do that all along. Yeah, that seems pretty trustworthy if you ask me, Mr. Ping Pong. But even more interesting, the thing that started this whole spiral I went into is this post which came from Reddit. It was someone on the London subreddit saying, flour and grape is keeping things sane. Is it a big deal? No, but it's refreshing given all the chatter about service charges, where they said, we've moved to all-inclusive prices. This means rather than adding a service charge at the end, we've considered it part of our overall prices so we can pay our team a fair and consistent wage they deserve for all aspects of their role. This sounds pretty good until you realize, wait, so this happened 2 days ago, and when was this again? When did this take effect? The changes to it? The 29th of July. Oh, so as soon as they legally had to start giving their service charge to their employees, they decided that they weren't going to have a service charge anymore, and they're talking about how great that is for the team. And again, I just think this is, maybe this is me being too cynical. Maybe they love their employees so much, and this is pure coincidence in timing that this was just after the law was announced, and this is just before it came into effect. But there are all sorts of places that are deciding they're not going to do service charges anymore now that the money has to go to the people who are actually servicing you. And even more interesting, if you look look at flour and grape, I decided to find them because I was sure I knew the name of the restaurant. It's right over here. If you've ever been on Bermondsey Street, it's a fairly popular one near London Bridge. And this is Flour and Grape. It's a nice building. I bet it costs a lot to be in there. And if we look at Flour and Grape on the on Google Maps, you can see something interesting, which is because this is something you should know about, by the way. I think obviously I think places are allowed to raise and change their prices over time, but I love the idea of menu photos on Google. It allows you to see what a menu price used to be, you know, like a decade ago if a restaurant's existed that long. So if we go all the way back to, what is this, January 2024? Okay, it's not based on time, but you can go back in time and you can see what restaurants used to have and do and serve. In my opinion, it's a cool, if not historical account, it's a cool way to see what prices are. So if we look at the prices from December 2022, you can see that they used to have a 10% discretionary service charge added to the bill. So they decided they really liked service charge back then. You know, before the service charge became all about going to the employees, they loved the idea of service charge. And then at some point since then, admittedly April 2024, so actually not 2 days ago, but they've done this a while ago, they decided to have prices that are all-inclusive and enable us to compensate our staff for all aspects of their role. And so it's like, oh, that's interesting that they've moved from service charge to all-inclusive right there, and you can actually see this reflected in the prices. Like, their prices went up a little more than 10%. To be fair, inflation has been probably similar amounts, especially in food, so, you know, their prices going up from £3.50 to £4 it's fairer than £3.85, whatever. So they raised their prices by more than 10%. You know, we'll leave that to the side for now. Things like this pasta dish went from £8.50 to £9.50, again above 10%, but they raised their prices by 10%, effectively building the service charge into the price. And the reason that they did that is, you know, because they want to give the staff a consistent and fair wage, and they decided to do that just now by pure coincidence when all this service charge stuff is going around. Okay, sure, I guess, except actually read this. It's really cynical. They say that they bundled that 10% into the price, but they're also asking for tips on top. They're like, well, scan this QR code below. They've created all these extra ways that you can tip the employees directly, which is the opposite of fair and consistent wages that you're, well, this is very high resolution. That is the exact opposite of fair and consistent wages that they deserve if you're saying that actually maybe you should tip them more often than you did before. So there's a little bit of cynicism I have about that, but even more cynical is the part of me that says, well, yeah, if you raise the prices for service charge, if you raise it and you're bundling it into the price, you actually haven't helped anyone out. You've just made it so that that service charge is now entirely yours to control because it's, you know, the price of olives now includes service, right? It's their little argument. I think it's a good move by itself, but I think it's actually quite cynically motivated. And if you look into it, it's actually a poor decision. The reason that so many restaurants have implemented service charges is not because they hate the customers and want to trick you out. The first time it happens to you, it feels real bad. I'm gonna be honest with you, no one wants to go to a place and then be like, oh, it turns out there's a service charge here. You know, if I'm going to the, let's pick a fancy place that I'm fairly sure will have it, right? If we go to, you know, actually, I feel like it's hard to necessarily know a place. But if I go to Hawksmoor, it's a fairly good steakhouse in London, and I'm looking at their prices on their menu. Well, if I'm looking at their prices on their menu and their menu actually exists, so let's go to. I want to go to Guildhall real bad. Just show me a menu here, Hawksmoor. When I'm looking at the menu, I think it's already kind of misleading to have a extra service charge because if I want the roasted scallops, they don't cost £21. They cost £21 plus. Oh, it doesn't actually say, but 12.5, 13.5%, something like that. So it's a little misleading in the first place, and it's a little crazy. But the weird thing is so why would restaurants not just add it on? Why are there that many people who won't pay £23 for scallops, but will pay £21? And the answer, I decided to look into it, is actually because of the way that service charge and tips are treated. One is that it's exempt from VAT. So if you look at this bill right here, you can see that there's £51 subtotal, then $7.65 service charge. The only thing that they have to pay, you know, 20% sales tax for any non-Europeans, a 20% sales tax on is the £51. The service charge is exempt from VAT because it's optional. There's no VAT, there's no sales tax on tipping, and so even if the tipping is pretty heavily implied you should do, it means that as long as fewer than 20% of people don't not pay a service charge, they're coming up ahead by putting as much of the money in there as they can. A restaurant could charge £1 for their food and £57 for service, And although that would probably be caught by HMRC as being very unreasonable, as long as it was genuinely discretionary and genuinely reflected their service costs, then they could get away with that. And by the way, I'm just realizing now, this person here, this is one person, right? It says covers one. This one person just ate 6 snails, some cabbage, some, you know, I don't know what's going on with them, but I have my own questions here. I've got a lot of things I'd like to say. But yeah, the other thing I'd like to say is the fact that the reason they do this is because when a service charge is paid, weirdly enough, there is no national insurance contribution unless unless it is made clear that, oh wait, so here we go. If the payment is voluntary, it's great, but if it's a mandatory service charge, you have to pay national insurance contribution, so you pay tax, and then you also pay a different type of tax, and then the employee pays a tax, plus there's VAT on it. So if you don't, so it's outside the scope of VAT, but inside the scope of income tax, but not national insurance, which means that, fun fact, if you just, if you go ahead and you leave, so cash tips left on the table will be, in the fun case of this, it's like, yeah, cash tips left on the table are outside the scope of dealing with this. You technically, unless someone collects those tips and distributes them. If the restaurant is involved in the tipping relationship between the customer and the employee, then there are some income tax contributions and there are some national insurance contributions in some cases, but no VAT. If there is a service charge, then there is no VAT and there is no income tax. There's no national insurance, but there is income tax. And basically what I'm trying to say is there's free taxes, and you can always get away with not paying at least one of them if you don't add it to your restaurant prices. Flour and Grape is acting like they're doing everyone a real favor, but actually they're making their business much less tax efficient. The people they're really helping out, if they genuinely are passing this money, which they've just gotten, on to the employees, is the people they really help out most would be HMRC, because now they get 20% VAT on £4 and not 20% VAT on £3.50, and then also when they pay their employees, instead of just paying income tax, they pay income tax and they pay national insurance. So the government gets a lot more money from this system, weirdly, than this system. This effectively is a tax dodge, if you see it that way. And so why would a company want to give the government a lots of money? Maybe they're very progressive. They want to see increased funding for all sorts of policies, and they think if they do their little bit, if they pass on their extra 10p here and their extra 10 quid there, that they can help out the country and the world. Or you could say they're a cynical business and they worked out that it's worth giving the government a bit more money if it means they don't have to pass the rest on to employees, and so service charges in the UK. Fun fact, they've just changed, and lots of restaurants dodging them are the ones that you should probably not be tipping at, and very specifically not paying brand charges at, because all these places use guilt to convince you that, this is to fund wage rises for restaurant teams. They'll use guilt to get you to pay these charges, but the actual benefit to them is in the tax-free nature of it, and that tax-free nature is only true if it is optional, and so I would say take advantage of your optionality if it's not actually going to the employees. But now when it is a discretionary service charge, then feel free to give it to them. Yeah, help out those employees if you like their service. It's they're giving you a tip with very little effort. If you already wanted to tip, you can keep the service charge on there. But fun fact, service charge discourse is something I needed to have, and today I'm very satisfied that we got that done. This is something very specific to me living in London, but on this channel, I cover a lot more than just this country, and if you'd like to see those videos, consider subscribing. There is now just a few days left, literally, we're talking just a couple of days left to get yourself a longboi, so check the link in the description. It is one of the cutest pieces of merch we've ever sold. If you haven't seen it, it is based on the channel logo, just like this. Look how cute this longboi is, and consider getting yourself one. There are literally 3 days, and then they'll never be sold again. Speaking of, and the money, 100% of it will go to my kebab habit. Speaking of my kebab habit, there's a fun, it's so hot in the UK right now. There's a heat wave, and that is why there is some random green here. My green screen is being bizarrely lit up by the sun. My bad. Speaking of my bad, don't forget to tip 12.5% if you enjoyed this video, because I'll see you next time. Goodbye.